So I'm going to begin by working on the pocket here for Apron D, and the first thing that I need to do is I need to machine stitch 1 inch from the slanted edges of the pocket. So these points here, this point and this point on these sides here, I am going to be stitching 1 inch from the edge. For those of you that have a metric machine, that is 2.5 centimeters from the edge. So I am not going to mark this. I'm just going to go over to my machine and I am going to use the measurements that are right on my machine and just make sure that I stay along those lines. For my machine, that is going to be this very outside marking here. So that's going to be the very last one. It's going to be my 1 inch measurement. So that's what I'm going to make sure that my fabric is lined up with as I'm doing this stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take where I just stitched. So I just stitched right here, and I'm going to take this raw edge and I'm going to fold it over so that it touches that stitching line that I did. And I am just going to go ahead and I'm going to press it so that again that raw edge matches up with that stitching line. And I am going to do that along both of those slanted edges that I just stitched. Okay, now that I have that pressed there on both of those slanted edges, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to fold it one more time, just so that my stitching that I have is right along that edge. And I am going to press this. Once I have both of these pressed, I'm going to go over to my machine and I'm going to do a base stitch. Now a base stitch is just a temporary stitch that's going to hold things in place while we do other things. So we go ahead and we change our stitch length to as long as it will go on my machine. That's going to be a 5. And we don't back stitch. We also want to make sure that we keep our threads long because we want to be able to easily pull it out later on. So when I go over to my machine, I'll kind of show you how I change my machine and where I need to be stitching. Okay, so I'm over here on my machine and I'm just going to take and move my length all the way up. Everything else on my machine is going to stay the same. I'm going to go over here and my needle is going to be in through all of my layers of fabric here, just right along that edge, the inner edge, okay? And I'm not going to back stitch this. I'm going to do this side and the other side, and keeping those threads nice and long when I'm done. So you can kind of see where I have that needle inserted. I'm just going to go straight along the edge there, all the way across. Okay, so I had that base stitch done. It's a little bit longer of a stitch, and again I didn't back stitch and I kept my threads nice and long. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go do a top stitch. So I'm going to just stitch right along the top of my fabric, and I am going to do that at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. For those of you with a machine using metric measurements, it's going to be a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So a 3/8 inch seam allowance right along both slanted edges. So I'm going to go do that, and then I will show you how we go about removing that base stitch that we're just using to hold that in place here. Okay, so I have that top stitch done on either one of those slanted sides there. And now I'm going to just go ahead and remove my base stitch. I did go ahead and I trimmed my threads of my top stitch just so I wouldn't accidentally grab those as I'm trying to remove the base stitch. And how I do this is I just go ahead and with that base stitch I just grab one of my 2 threads and I just kind of gently pull it out, and it'll kind of start to gather there as you see, but I'm just going to kind of keep pulling it. And it'll eventually just pull all the way out, and then that other one will just pull right on out as well. Okay, and you can do the same thing on the other side, just grabbing one of the threads and give them a little tuck. Now we're going to work on the rest of the edges of our apron. So we're going to go ahead and with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, we are going to stitch just the upper side here and then both of these sides. Okay, we're not going to do anything with the bottom of the pocket right now, but we're just going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance on both sides and the top. And those of you with a metric machine, that is going to be a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Okay, now I have that stitching line on those sides, and I'm going to take it, I'm going to turn my fabric so that my stitching line is right along the edge, and I'm just going to press that. And I'm going to do this on both sides and along the top. So that stitching that I just put in goes along the edge, and I press that. Okay, so now I'm back to my apron here with my pocket, and I need to pay attention to those placement lines that were on my pattern. I did transfer them in a couple of spots to the front of my pattern, so I just have them, you probably can't see them. They're just transferred with fabric pencil. I've got a couple of dashes on either side. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna line up the sides of my pocket with those, and then the bottom, my bottom raw edge should be lined up with the bottom raw edge of the apron as well. So I just want to make sure that I'm placing that pocket in with those placement lines, and that's just going to ensure that it is kind of centered on my apron as I do that. So then I can go ahead and I can pin that in place. Okay, so I have my apron pinned in place with that upper line and the side lines. Now I'm going to go ahead and I am going to do a base stitch. I'm going to do a hand base stitch. So I have my needle threaded, and I did put a knot on the end of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch through all of my layers of fabric on the top of this pocket here, and I'm going to just do a really nice long running stitch along this top edge. And I'm going to do it in contrasting fabric, not only so that you can see it, but also so that later when I am pulling it out, I can really easily tell which one I need to be ripping out and which stitch needs to stay in place, because I am going to go back through here and add a top stitch in a very similar area here. And then when I am done with that long running stitch, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to snip my thread, but again, I'm going to leave my tail really nice and long. I'm going to do the same thing along both of these side edges as well of my apron, and I'm going to do that hand based again. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my top stitch, and my top stitch is just going to be where I just basted, so right along this top edge of the pocket and then both sides of the pocket. I am not going to do anything at the bottom of the pocket yet. That will get sewn in when we hem the bottom of our apron. So I'm just going to do those three areas, the two sides and the top, with my regular seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch. And I will be doing my regular stitch on my machine as well, making sure that I back stitch really well, because if we want this pocket to be functional, I really want a nice back stitch to hold any weight that might be applied when I put something into the pocket. I am not going to sew on these two areas because this is where I need to leave an opening so that my pocket functions. Okay, so now I have done that top stitch, As you can see, I'll zoom in here. So I've got 2 stitchings along the top and the sides. I've just got that top stitch and then that purple base stitch that I did. So I can go ahead and I can remove that base stitch now. So I'm just gonna go to the back side where I have that knot, and I'm just gonna kind of pull that out because I only knotted it on the one side. So now those base stitches are pulled out. So I'll show you what it looks like at this point. And then the rest of the videos are actually going to be along with aprons A and B, because the finishing part is the same for all of 3 of the aprons here.